Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, we are going to head on back to Overly Sarcastic Productions today, and we're going to take a look at their history summarized Scotland. Well, you guys know, if you've been around the channel very long, I talk a lot about my Scottish roots. According to Ancestry DNA, I am 1/3 Scottish. So it's somewhere that I'm very proud that part of my family is from. And I'm always excited to learn a little bit more about one of my ancestral homelands. So let's go ahead and dive right into this one.
In researching this video, I very quickly learned a valuable lesson about how little the Scots mess around. Okay, I thought, the Scots and the English hate each other, sure, but it can't be that bad, honestly. So I took a little peruse to see how many times the two actually fought each other, and sweet Mother Mary, that is a lot of stabbing! Scotland, who hurt you? Trick
The
question,
English.
England. So be warned, the Scots throughout history are every bit as bonkers as they come across on Twitter.
And I know, listen, I don't pretend to know all of the ins and outs of the politics of everything with Brexit and what's going on in the United Kingdom, but I know there's a big Scottish independence movement, and I know that some of you who live in Scotland, who are followers of this channel, probably have very strong opinions one way or the other about that. I don't, obviously, but at the same time, it'll be interesting to see what we can learn in this video.
To find out why, let's do some history. This video is brought to you by Audible, which is a wee bit ironic, seeing as the Scottish language is damn near inaudible. Around 2,000 years ago, Scotland was inhabited by various tribes of Pictish Celts, living up north, herding, and minding their own business. So when the Roman Empire swaggered up to try and conquer them, they gave those Romans a walloping so bad that Emperor Hadrian built a wall just to make sure that nobody ever tried to conquer them again.
And, really cool that to this day you can see bits of Hadrian's Wall all the way along. And it wasn't just a wall, there were forts along the wall too. And a lot of the remains of those forts still exist. It's always interesting, growing up, when I thought of Celts to me were Scottish. But, if you learn your history, you know that the Celts were a big part of mainland Europe as well. So it's kind of interesting that you had these Pictish Celts all the way up here, where you had a lot of other Celts that were down, in France and some of those areas.
Essentially,
I just don't think you can do this one. I've been an assassin for a while now. What makes you think, oh, get that shit out of here, you're right.
so even though these original Celts weren't anything like modern Scots, it is refreshing to see the national character demonstrated so well at such an early stage. Rome eventually collapsed, but Europe reintroduced itself to Scotland via Christianity and Anglo-Saxon migrations, which coalesced through the 7th century into a few main groups. For our purposes, the most relevant two are the Picts and the Scoti, where we get the name Scotia, aka Scotland. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpin...
And yeah, so, Canada has Nova Scotia, which is New Scotland.
united the Scots and Picts in order to create the Kingdom of Alba. The early kingdom had to deal with the Vikings and the English in the 800s and 900s as land from every corner was getting yoinked. But beyond outside threats, there were also constant internal fisticuffs over the crown. The quintessential example of the early Scottish king is Macbeth, whom hereafter shall be referred to exclusively as McBoy because that play is haunted and I'm not looking for trouble.
But when you're talking about the person, this is my understanding with having a daughter that's really into theater, it's okay to talk about it's okay to talk about the guy. You don't talk about the play, even though they have the same name. So if you're referring to the guy Macbeth, it's okay. We just don't talk about the play. I think that's how it works. Speaking of which, Apple TV's got a new version of Macbeth coming out with Denzel Washington playing Macbeth. So I'm pretty excited about that. He's one of those actors I will watch anything he's in.
Trouble is, nearly everything you might know about him from Shakespeare is wrong. Here's why. See, the Scottish crown didn't follow...
For that matter, anything you learn about anybody from Shakespeare is probably wrong.
a strict succession, but claimants came to debate who was best fit to rule, and this caused constant disputes that escalated into wars. So MacBoy actually killed King Duncan in a battle in the year 1040 and ruled for the next 17 years peacefully, generously, and successfully. In 1057, he died in another battle against Duncan's son Malcolm Canmore, who then assumed the throne. All that stuff about murder conspiracies got added by Scottish historians centuries later, but civil wars over the throne were already a matter of protocol since the kingdom had gotten started. MacBoy's real-life path was actually quite quite standard. But speaking of wonky royal succession crises, the next decade brought the Norman conquest of England, and William the Conqueror's second son Henry married King Malcolm's daughter. The family relations are confusing now, and they stay that way for the next 1,000 years, so
And that's true in any royal family. There's so much inbreeding and crossing over, and I mean, nobody beats the Ptolemies in Egypt on that, but I mean, all these royal families intermarried to each other.
I'm gonna try to avoid specifics where I can for the sake of my sanity, but the bottom line is that the King of Scotland exchanged notes with his sister, the Queen of England, about culture and statecraft. So in the following 2 centuries, Scotland picked up some Norman tricks, like a central bureaucracy, a church hierarchy, and a curious new language derived from the Norman French, called Scots. The native Gaelic was still the dominant language in the Highlands especially, but the Lowlands trended...
The Scottish dialect is their revenge against the English language for being so absurd. I like that.
Slowly towards the customs of their anglicized southern neighbors. The 11 and 1200s saw a steady back and forth between Scotland and England along the borders in Northumbria, but not a whole lot of drama. Until, however, the King of Scotland died in 1286 without a clear heir, and rather than have all 13 possible cousins duke it out the old-fashioned way, they called in the English king to...
I don't think he died without a clear heir. He died with a very young female heir who then turned around and died pretty young. And that's when you go into this crisis where you have the Balliols and the Bruces and all these other folks. And this is where the Braveheart story comes in with William Wallace. The fictionalized version is in Braveheart. But this is where William Wallace comes in and fights and then ends up getting executed. And then this really famous scene where you have Robert the Bruce killing John Cummin in a church in a place that was supposed to be safe. And this is the kind of stuff that will come to symbolize Scotland. The Stuarts in particular, when we get to them, I mean, just one Stuart king after another dies some horrible death.
To mediate the dispute, which, I don't know, seems like kind of a short-sighted and terrible idea. Unsurprisingly, King Edward installed the weakest, most pliable puppet who would let him treat Scotland like a vassal state.
And that's the thing, it's not like Scotland really had much of a choice on the whole having Edward come in and mediate. Edward kind of forced himself on them, and they really weren't in a position to do anything. This is before Scotland formed what they call the Old Alliance, AULD Alliance, with Scotland and France, because France kind of becomes the protector of Scotland, which keeps them from being conquered by England for the next 300 years.
And when even that pushover got fed up with forfeiting Scottish land, paying tribute, and kneeling to English superiority, King Edward invaded Scotland, dethroned the king, and yoinked the Scottish coronation stone back to Westminster,
Stone of
driving
Scone.
Scotland firmly under the English heel. This was, frankly, terrible, so the Scots duly rebelled against England under the command of the famous William Wallace.
So that stone, it's spelled S-C-O-N-E, but I think it's pronounced like Scone or something like that. I'm not very good with my accents. I apologize to everyone in Scotland for screwing that up. But there's actually, under the coronation chair in London that they use in Westminster Abbey, there's a slot where they put that stone. And up until the last century or so, it was still there in London. And they finally just sent it back to Scotland. But I think they still would bring it down for future coronations.
Who won a victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, but lost horrendously at Falkirk the next year, and was later executed by England and paraded around Scotland in pieces. Quick fun fact, of the many, many reasons that the movie Braveheart sucks, the blue war paint that everybody's wearing is about 1,000 years out of style for the Scots.
I wouldn't say Braveheart sucks. It's a really good movie. It's a great movie. It's just not a historically accurate movie, but it's really good. Here's the thing, and here's how I kind of view these movies. Yeah, it bothers me when stuff is blatantly inaccurate for no reason. Like, I get that some things have to be changed to tell a story in a 2-hour movie. I accept that. What I don't accept are things that are done that don't have to be done. And sometimes that happens with Braveheart. But Braveheart led me to spend weeks studying the real William Wallace. And so it inspired in me the desire to learn more about the real history. So for that, I'm grateful for it. And it is an entertaining movie. So, incredible characters, some great acting, some really cool scenes. But no, it's not history.
I mean, come on, that kind of anachronism is like dressing the cast of The Godfather in togas. It was after Wallace died that Robert the Bruce took up the mantle of Guardian of Scotland. He had to kill a rival claimant to earn his title, but he also earned an excommunication from the Pope because apparently murdering somebody in a church is impolite
John Cummin, yeah.
and a mortal sin. Pfft, whatever. He was defeated.
Yeah, and if you want to see a really good version of that, that whole story of what happens with Robert the Bruce in the aftermath of all that, Chris Pine playing Robert the Bruce in, I think it's on Netflix, Outlaw King, fantastic. And that's much more sticks to the real history.
Early by Edward in 1306 and went into hiding for a year before returning to win the Battle of Loudon Hill. From there, he stomped out local rivalries and united Scotland fully against the English at the decisive Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Though the treaties weren't...
And Bannockburn, which we've talked about on this channel, in fact, I'll put a link in the description to my video talking about that. Brilliant victory by the Scottish over the English forces, and nothing like what it's portrayed in the movie Braveheart.
Signed for another 15 years, Robert the Bruce won Scotland 3 centuries of independence in that battle. Quick OS pro tip, skip Braveheart, but watch The Outlaw King. It's better and way more accurate. So
Now, Outlaw King does still have some flaws, like the final battle in Outlaw King, showing Edward II being there and captured. None of that happened, but by and large, it's a much more accurate film.
Fulfilled his dreams for his kingdom, Robert died the next year, but this was exceptionally poor timing and really unfortunate in the long run because the throne passed to a series of useless kings from the House of Stuart for the next several decades. Through the 13 and 1400s, Scotland had no real leadership, so the local lords started throwing hands, or more accurately, claymores. In this case, the warring states were actually the dozens of clans scattered across the lowlands and highlands. Mercifully, England had just gotten sucked into the 100 Years' War with France, so Scotland was free to be its own antagonist, the way God intended. And although the Stuarts
Scotland was free to be its own antagonist, the way God intended. He's got a great point, though. It's excellent timing for Scotland that, because that infighting that was going on would have been the perfect opportunity for England to march in and take over the country. But because England had its issues to deal with France in the 100 Years' War, it did not have time. And by the time England comes out of the 100 Years' War, it goes right into the Wars of the Roses. So now it's got its own clan wars, so to speak. Its own basically civil war with rival factions from the same family duking it out, and people on either side deciding which side they're going to be on. So in a lot of ways, it resembles the clan wars in Scotland.
Clan still held the crown, other families like the Douglas clan were regularly challenging them for land and power. Some progress came with King James I in 1406, who sent 12,000 Scotsmen to fight with France against England in the 100 Years' War, winning big and returning home in a strong position to consolidate many of the clans under his crown and reform the kingdom. Unfortunately, he got assassinated, and it was right back to the seesawing balance of power between kings, regents, lords, and clans.
And this is what will happen with all of the Jameses in the Stuart line. It goes, James I, second, third, fourth, and sixth. Then James VI becomes King James I of England. And I've done a lot of studying on the Stuarts because I'm a descendant of James IV through an illegitimate child that he had. So let me show you what I mean about these Stuarts. Okay, so as we mentioned, James I is assassinated. He's chased down through a tunnel, which was blocked off on the other end because they were trying to keep tennis balls from getting out. And so he gets cornered and killed. But his young son, James II, survives. So let's take a look here. That's James II, King of Scots. He dies at the age of 29. I don't remember how he died. Oh, he was the artillery accident. That's right. So they're firing these cannon. On August 3rd, he is standing near one of the cannons known as the Lion when it exploded and killed him. His thigh bone was dug in two with a piece of the misframed gun that brake in shooting, by which he was stricken to the ground and died hastily. So at that point, then his son James III comes to the throne. James III is 36, 37 years old when he dies. He is killed in battle. And he's there at Cambuskenneth Abbey. I believe he's the only one of the Stuart kings in Scotland whose grave can still be seen today, because all the other ones were in abbeys that were later destroyed, things like that. Well, James IV, I think, is his body's somewhere in London under maybe like a tube station or something. I don't remember exactly where they think it was. But James IV then is killed at the Battle of Flodden Field, fighting against forces of Henry VIII, his brother-in-law. though Henry wasn't there. I believe his wife, Catherine of Aragon, was present for that battle, or was the regent at the time, because Henry was, I think, over in France. James V, then, is he the one that, yeah, he dies at the age of 30, so you can see not a long life expectancy. He dies following the Scottish defeat at the Battle of Solway Moss, and then his daughter is Mary, Queen of Scots, who was executed, and then her son is James VI, who is one of the rare ones that dies a natural death, but then his son is executed, so you get the point. Not good times for the Stuart kings.
Even after James, the Highlanders still largely spoke Gaelic and paid little heed to the culture or politics of the anglicised royal court in the lowlands. The king could say whatever he wants down in Edinburgh, but unless he personally marches up to Inverness to tell Clan Fraser in person to pay their taxes, it's not gonna happen. And one king even tried that, but still nothing happened. It's just all very Game of Thronesy for a couple centuries. And I mean, heck, it's at this time that the War of the Roses is raging on just down the street. And you know what? Since it's just a big mess anyway, I'm gonna speed round through the next 300 years, so bear with me and let's get ready for a game of Monarchy is Volatile! Let's meet our players. One king was really cool and helped reform the government to work for more of Scotland while
James
making
IV
Edinburgh into a Renaissance capital of learning and culture. One queen got the short end of the stick when Scotland's parliament voted to convert to Protestantism while she was on vacation in France, and then she got the shorter end of the stick when England imprisoned her for 2 decades and then executed her.
So she wasn't on vacation in France. She married the future king of France, and then he dies really young. And then she eventually comes back to England, where they have, or to Scotland, where they have no interest whatsoever in a Catholic queen in newly Protestant Scotland. But she is the heir to the throne in the event that Queen Elizabeth I dies. And so that's why she's a threat to Elizabeth. For people who, especially Catholic people who want to overthrow Elizabeth and restore England to Catholicism, Mary is the person they want. And so she's imprisoned and then eventually executed. And there's a whole long story that goes with that we won't get into right now.
Her son played his cards just right and inherited the throne of England from his cousin, the childless Elizabeth, and then became King of England and Scotland. His son was so inconceivably bad at being king that his abuses of power brought England and Scotland into open rebellion for entirely separate reasons, and his reign ended with the British Isles locked in 12 years of civil war before everybody called a do-over and gave the crown back to his son. One king became king because Parliament literally invited him from the Netherlands to replace their current monarch.
It's called the Glorious Revolution. And William of Orange and his wife Mary were actually both grandchildren of the same king, and first cousins, so they jointly rule. And then, of course, Anne becomes the last Stuart queen of Scotland and England.
And then he proceeded to strangle Scottish trading rights. And the last queen on our list tried to be a pal by offering Scotland a national union with England to open up trade avenues in exchange for the bargain price of nearly all of their sovereignty. I'd originally gone way in depth about how all of this stuff went down in my first draft, but then I realized, you know what? Royal politics is dumb and confusing, and I kind of hate it more than anything else in history.
I don't think it's dumb, but it can be confusing.
So I'm gonna skip through it. Yeah. So I did. One standout event from the mid-1500s is when the King of England tried to drive a wedge between a long-standing alliance between Scotland and France. And
the old alliance.
Scotland to their southern English neighbors. They did this by pillaging the lowlands and burning Edinburgh to the ground. You may find that this is a bad way to make new friends. The Scots came to call the 7-year campaign the Rough Wooing, as they did not appreciate being bullied into love. And this sentiment...
And that's in the aftermath of that whole Battle of Solway Moss, where you have King James dying.
For centuries, way up until the Act of Union in 1707. Scotland was suspicious of the Queen's offer of partnership, and while they'd get one metric British Empire out of the deal in the long run, the immediate result was England deciding they now had a constitutional right to treat Scotland like a colony. As you can see, this is kind of a recurring problem, and it led to 2 revolts for Scottish independence in 1715 and in 1745.
And that's if you're a fan of, what's the name of the show? I can't remember off the top of my head, but they show the whole Battle of Culloden, which was part of the Jacobite rebellions, all of that stuff. I'm sure everybody's going to think of it. As soon as I stopped recording, I remembered it was Outlander. Okay.
Both failed, but the second one spooked England into being slightly less despicable about everything. In the next century and a half following the rebellions, things turned remarkably for the better as the Enlightenment came north. Writers like Walter Scott and Robert Burns helped rekindle the Scottish identity, and thinkers like Adam Smith and David Hume radically changed European perspectives on rational thought and economics. Hume claimed that reason was the core of human thought, and Smith described the benefits of letting people act in their own self-interest. This all sounds very profound, but don't be fooled. The clear Scottish subtext to these ideas are, the English don't make a damn lick of sense, and we'd be better off making our own decisions.
And so there's this thing, a lot of these guys have statues in Scotland, which makes sense. And apparently in Glasgow, which is one of the places that my family comes from, though my family that lived in Glasgow, they weren't actually Scottish, they were English. They had come from the West Midlands, gone up to Glasgow for a couple of decades, ran a pub, the old Toll, and then they go to America from there. But apparently a thing they do, and I don't know if this is just Glasgow or if this is everywhere in Scotland, they do this, where they like to put the orange cones on the heads of the statues. So it's just kind of a funny, weird thing they do there.
You can't expect a Scottish Enlightenment thinker to not bury snide comments at England under 2 tons of hard academic theory. Though Scotland had long been an educational powerhouse, in the following 2 centuries they also became the industrial heart of the British Empire, producing such famous doodads as the steam engine, the telephone, radar, a mechanical television, and also most of the ships in the Imperial Royal Navy.
And a lot of the cannon as well. A lot of these are made in Glasgow. Right there on the River Clyde, it's a lot of steel industry there. Just a perfect place to build things.
Nice. Other happy beneficiaries of the 18th and 19th centuries were the cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh, which built up substantially in the Georgian neoclassical style.
That's Glasgow. Oh, I recognize that because, or no, that's the Edinburgh Castle right there. Yeah, I think so. See, my first thought was that was Glasgow because Glasgow has this beautiful Glasgow necropolis that is right behind the cathedral and overlooks the city, and it's one of the places I'm looking forward to going to the most, but I don't think Glasgow has a castle like that. That's got to be Edinburgh Castle, right? Somebody from Scotland helped me out on that one.
Look really damn pretty. Funny thing about the Edinburgh Castle is instead of firing off 12 cannon shots to mark the passing of noon like the English do, they just wait 1 hour and save 11 rounds. So Scottish. Quickly approaching the modern day now, Scottish attitudes towards the Union grew more suspicious as England seems to care less and less by the decade about what happened up north, and the hard-forged British identity faded with
bums out
time
the
over
window.
decline of the British Empire. After years of campaigning, Scotland gained greater autonomy and the right to hold their own parliament in 1999, and the first words spoken there were, quote, "The Scottish Parliament, adjourned on the 25th of March, 1707, is hereby
That's awesome. I love that.
And if that is not some big Scotland energy right there, then
love it.
wrap me in a tartan plaid and throw me in Loch Ness, because I know what is. Now, if you want to jump into the tumultuous world of medieval Scottish murder kings, then you've got to go for Shakespeare.
Medieval Scottish murder kings. I love this guy's just his approach to history, because he's very factual, but then he throws in just enough stuff that makes it really funny, and so I really appreciate that a lot. And I think that's it. I think he's just going to be talking about like Audible at the end here, which, by the way, I'm working on getting my own sponsorship with Audible. I'm waiting to hear back from them, but I think it's going forward very soon. So excited about that because I love Audible. I use it all the time. A lot of the research I do for my historical site visits comes from books that I get on Audible. So let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear in particular from our Scottish friends because I know there are a bunch of you out there. So let me know what you think about this. Did he get it right? Did he get a good feel for how you feel as a Scot? Use the comment section below, and if you have suggestions for other things you'd like me to react to, particularly from Overly Sarcastic Productions, let me know. I put a link in the description to the original video so you can check that out. Thanks for watching.